Hello, everybody. Yay, we're here. We had a little Zoom problem. Can you turn off your So good evening and welcome to our Zoom webinar. I'm Sheila Christensen, and just looking to see people joining us, lots of people joining us at the moment, which is wonderful. While we're just warming up, you turn your phone right down so I can hear it. Oh, okay, sorry. I have Brenda here helping me. Zoom had a little wobbly just now, so we think we're okay now. That's good. So welcome, and we're here in New Zealand. It's the evening, so kia ora to you, and say hello if you're here. So by raising your hand, so at the bottom of your screen you have reactions, and so if you can hear me and everything's good, if you click on the little face by the reactions, if you could press the thumbs up, that would be wonderful. We'd know. Excellent, thank you so much. I'm going to raise a big hooray. A celebration. So you can interact with us using the Q&A or the reactions. So Q&A is where you can type in any questions that you have, and then Brenda can then pose those questions to me at a convenient moment. So kia ora again, and welcome everybody to Polish Up Your Piecing. So I want to start this webinar by backpedaling a little bit, because I've called the webinar Polish Up Your Piecing, but I don't want people to feel like that's the most important thing, because it's not. So I'd like to think about why do we make quilts? And so I will try. I've got some slides I'm going to try to share with you. And I'm going to press share and play. So let's see. Why do we make quilts? So obviously a lot of us make them when we have a new baby coming. So Brenda, can you see my share okay? Fantastic. Woohoo. So when there's a new baby coming in the family, it makes us go all, oh, I want to make a quilt. I want to make something for the baby. And it's just lovely. And it's a way that a lot of people get into doing their quilting, a way that a lot of people start. That's the trigger. And then let's see, can we move on? I will try to move on. Okay, I'm going to stop that share a moment. Okay. So also another reason for doing quilting is making friends, and it can be just an amazing community of people, friendship, and also it's really good for our mental health because it's a really good mindful activity. So that's another reason why we quilt. So far, have we seen a reason why our points need to match perfectly? I haven't. Oh, Linda, you've lost audio. Oh, I don't know. I think the audio should be okay. Can't you? Okay. It's one of those days. So when life gives you scraps, make quilts. And that's why it's good for our mental health, because it really takes our mind off other things. So quilting is just fantastic. But sometimes it can also be a little bit frustrating, especially if somebody is very fussy and looks at our quilts a lot and goes, that point doesn't match. And I don't mean to say it's the husband. It's just was the picture I found where somebody was inspecting a quilt? It could be anybody. It could be somebody else in our guild or somebody that we give the quilt to. They can be. And then some people do quilting to try to win prizes. The prizes, not the value of the prizes, but the feeling of achievement, which is absolutely fantastic. And there are some people who can do that and it's their thing, but it's not everybody's thing. I love this saying, comparison is the thief of joy. So I really encourage you not to try to compare your quilting with somebody else's, because your quilting is you, and you're doing it to enjoy it. The whole point of it is it's a hobby. So do just enjoy what you're doing. And when I can escape from this, I'm coming back to you. Stop the share. There you go. So yeah, it's really the reason to improve on your piecing. Why would we want to do it? So it could be because you want to enter it and display it, and you feel like, oh, I really need it to be better to do that. But really, people worry way too much about that. Anybody who looks at your quilts goes, oh, it's amazing, it's absolutely beautiful. And there's very few people, only mean-minded people, who will look to see whether your points match. But the other reason for doing it is the satisfaction and the enjoyment of your hobby altogether. So I found it really, really hard when I started. And other people around me seem to find it easy. And I'm not a naturally neat person. So that made it tricky for me. But eventually I did manage to find, different ways to make my piecing better. And it has made me enjoy the hobby more. So the more you can make your starting points more accurate, the easier the end part of the quilt gets. And so that's why I'm going to share tips with you today. Oh, great, Linda. Thank you. That's great that you've done that. And Annika currently quilts to gift to longtime friends as a thank you for long-time good friendship. Isn't that lovely? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over to the top-down camera, and I'm going to show you some of the tips that I've got for helping with your piecing. Oh, I still have my Dresden plate ruler there, which I'm not using. Let's move that out of the way. So I've got some fabrics here, and I'm going to be doing a bit of piecing demonstration with them. So before I start, and this is one tip, this is the first tip, before you start, make sure that your fabric is nice and flat. And I am as guilty as anybody else of not doing that. Sometimes your ruler will flatten it out, but it is good to just have it nice and crisp and flat. Oh, can you pass me the flatter spray, please, Bryn? Thank you. So this is one way. You can use a spray starch or a best press or flatter or a bit of steam or a bit of water. And it just smells delicious, that one. And it just helps you to flatten everything out. So there's my one fabric. Let's do this one this time. Love these fabrics. Spray on that one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a test that we do in our classes to test your 1/4 inch seam. Because if you are making blocks, usually you're going to find that for normal piecing, they're going to say, cut, say, for example, 2.5 inch pieces and join them together. And so what we're going to do is a little test to see if when we join them together, they come out at the right size. So here's another few tips for starting off on the right way, on the right track. One is making sure you've got a nice new blade, or at least that your blade is working properly in your rotary cutter. They last quite a long time, but eventually they give out and you have to put a new one in. And then you feel like, why didn't I do that earlier? To make sure that your mat is nice and flat and not buckled, because if it's buckled, you just won't get the accuracy. And to get to know your ruler really well. And the reason why I say that is that rulers really vary a lot. They've got thick or thin measurements, measurement lines. When you've had a ruler for a while, it can actually wear away at the edge. And so you kind of get to know the ins and outs of your own ruler by practicing. So what I'm going to do here is just trim up on the right. So I'm making sure that I've got a nice straight edge to start cutting from. And then I can rotate my fabric around. And I'm going to put the 2.5 inch line here onto the edge of the fabric. Now, when I say onto the edge of the fabric, does that mean the line sits on the fabric or the fabric just touches the line? I usually try to make this one with the line just covering the edge of the fabric. And that's what works for me. But you might find that moving your ruler according to your line on your ruler you might want to have it on the edge of the fabric or just slightly off. And doing this sort of test is going to help you decide what works for you. Could you see the name of your spray? Yes. So Darren, this is called Flatter. And this is yuzu flavor, which I just love. Yuzu and Celebration are my favorites. Smells like a quilter's spa. But you can use this, you can use Best Press, or like I say, just fill a spray bottle like that with some water. These ones do kind of make it really nice and crisp and nice to cut. If you use Best Press, I still put the Best Press in one of these bottles because I find their bottles leak. And then that makes a big mess all over my ironing board. Right. So I have my 2 strips, they're 2.5 inches. And you can see that together, they measure about 5 inches if I put them side by side. And so when I sew with a 1/4 inch seam, we're going to lose 1/4 inch off here and 1/4 inch off here. And so the measurement should be 4.5 inches when they're sewn together. So we're going to go over to the sewing machine and I'm going to show you how to set that up. I'm just going to switch the cameras over. Okay, sewing machine cam. You can't see the little dance that Brenda and I are doing around the around the room. Okay. So on your sewing machine, I'm just going to move this camera very slightly so you don't get seasick. So you can see a little bit better. There we go. Thank you all. Okay, so most sewing machines on the plate here will have some markings. Mine says 1/8 inch and 3/8 inch. So the one in between those two is your 1/4 inch marking. So that's your first clue for where to line up your fabric if your needle is in the middle position. So some machines you can move your needle left or right. That can be extremely handy. And then I have on here a 1/4 inch foot. But this 1/4 inch foot doesn't have a guide on it. I just use the edge of this foot as a guide. You can also get that sort of a 1/4 inch foot, which has this guide on. But you need to be very careful about using the guide. Don't just assume that you're going to get a 1/4 inch seam because you've used the guide. It's all part of your own setup to know whereabouts you're going to hold your fabric. So you have to do a bit of practice. And I just need to have 3 pieces. So I'm just going to quickly cut these into chunks, which I didn't do over there, but that's okay. Oh, thank you, Linda. I'll give a shout out to Joelle at Beauty Within in Masterton. She does my nails and she always does a beautiful job. Right, so I've just chopped these up so that I've got 3 pieces. Obviously my chopping at the end is not very straight, but it doesn't matter. So I've got these 3 pieces. I'm going to join them in a row, and then when I've finished, this center should measure 2 inches. So the first thing for sewing is that you need to make sure that your 2 pieces, the edges, are lined up correctly, because if they're off a little bit like that, you won't get a 1/4 inch seam. And then you're going to guide it into your machine. So you've got this marker on here. You may have a 1/4 inch foot, and if you don't, you can start off by popping a little bit of masking tape on your 1/4 inch, and you can even do something like measure from your needle to see where the 1/4 inch is. You can see, I don't know if you can see this ruler, but the 1/4 inch from my needle measures exactly to the edge of my foot here. So that's another way that you can try and guess whereabouts you need to be. And it is a process. If you're new to it, it's a process of guess, try, measure, adjust until you've got it how you want it. So I'm going to start off on a little scrap of fabric. Some people call this a thread saver and some call it a leader or an ender. So another couple of tips about your sewing machine that is going to help you stay accurate is keep your sewing machine clean by taking this plate off and cleaning out all the fluff from time to time. And it's amazing how quickly that builds up. Make sure that your needle you change about every 8 hours of sewing. And then that will help you. You want to stack all the odds in your favor, don't you? So now I've got these 2 pieces and I'm going to line them up under my foot. And you want to make sure that you're staying straight all the way down. I'll show you in a moment what happens when you don't. And so I'm not pulling from the back, I'm just holding next to the foot. And so long as my finger doesn't go over the foot, I'm not going to sew into it. So that's my first bit. Let me sew onto my little end piece there. This helps you you don't have to keep cutting the thread, so you don't have a great long tail of thread to deal with all the time. So that's our first seam. You can see the stitches on there. My stitch length on this defaults to 1.8 millimeters. And that really is nice, gives you a nice stitch. I would go up to probably 2.2 at the most. Of course, the smaller it is, the harder it is to unpick when you get an error, which you have to expect that you're going to get from time to time. Okay, so now I'm going to take this other piece and I'm going to line up the edges, make sure they're all lined up. And oops, so that one. So all the way down. So I'm letting the feed dogs pull my fabric. I'm not trying to pull it myself. And there we are. Now I'm going to show you what I do when I get tired and why it affects my piecing if that happens and I have to go, maybe time to stop. Let's just chop this up a bit. So, you know, when you're happily piecing away and you know, going as fast as you can, I'm going to get this quilt done. If it kills me. Whee! And then you put your next one in. All right, let's get this done. So can anybody spot what I did just then? I wonder if anybody noticed. Did it just look the same as before? So what I did was I was sewing along like this, and then, oops, let's turn it this way around so you can see here. I'll point. I'm sewing along merrily way, doing my 1/4 inch, and then I went wee off at the end, and you can see that this end here is a lot less than the 1/4 inch there. I put those together. I've got a bit of a knot on the back, so let's just put that like that. So at this end, you've got a 1/4 inch seam, and at this end, I've lost probably almost about a 1/16, maybe almost an 1/8 of an inch at the end. And so when I press that open, and then I come along with my next piece to join them, I'm going to find that 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, which is where things cross over. This is not a 1/4 inch across here. And so I'm going to have a problem matching up the points. And I call those happy seams. So that's the first thing to look for. If you're finding things just don't make sense, they don't match, or they don't measure what they should, just have a look at your seam and see if it's consistent 1/4 inch all the way down.
Brenda and Annika noticed. Brenda said you did a wobble.
I did. Yeah, I did wider here. I went wider here, and then I went narrower there. And it's so easily done. I do it all the time. And if you can get things to match when it happens, it's fine. It's not a problem. But if you're trying to troubleshoot and getting very frustrated and tearing your hair out because something's not working, that's the thing to look at. That's the first thing to look at.
The suggestion was using contrasting threads that we have.
Oh, yes, thank you. It is hard to see. We will. So, yeah, I wonder if I can draw on here. Don't think so. Okay. So our next step is going to be to take this over to the cutting mat, and we're going to give it a press. Actually, not on the cutting mat. We're going to do it on the pressing mat. Okay, so we're going to switch cameras again. So easily done. I do happy seams. They just happen because you switch your brain off a little. You're not always focusing. Right. If we can see that. There we go. I'm going to just try and draw on where my thread is so that you can see better. Here we go. So that's where my thread is. The pen I've used is an iron off pen, so it's going to disappear when I press the seam. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to settle this seam. I'm going to put the iron on to make these threads sit down in the fabric. Like that. Oh, you're welcome, Robin. And then I'm going to open that up slightly and just put the tip of my iron into the gap of the seam, or into where the seam joins. Okay, and that's to try and avoid me getting pleats, because pleats mean that your seam is not the right width. And now I'm going to just hold this on for a few seconds. And the important thing here is not to be going like that, because if you do that, you're going to stretch your fabric. So there's my seam there. I have today, show you, somebody asked me whether I use one of these. This is called a clapper or a tailor's clapper. My husband made me this one. What that does is that will just let the heat come out slowly, and it actually really helps to flatten everything. So let's press the other seam. So settle it in, open it up, and then press. And I never realized at first, I'm an impatient person. So when I first started quilting, Brenda's laughing. Why are you laughing, Brenda? It's so true. So I used to just go, oh yeah, iron it, and then go, oh, why is nothing matching? And then I noticed that people who can do it were just holding the iron down for quite a few seconds, and it really makes a difference. So now comes the moment of truth. Can I still do this in the evening? Yeah. So what you're going to do then is we're going to measure from here to here. So if you remember, we've cut this at 2.5. These actually, it doesn't really matter what we cut these at, but we can measure from the edge to the edge now because we know what they are. But the important thing is this middle one started at 2.5. And so if we've sewn a 1/4 inch seam here and a 1/4 inch seam there, then it should measure 2 inches from there to there. And the way to check that is to put your ruler on, find a line that up with your seam here, and then see if it lines up over here. And it looks like I'm good at the beginning, and then I have actually gone off a little bit. No, I'm just a bit twisted. No, it's just my ruler that's twisted. I haven't. I've done it right. Woohoo! Okay, so steam you can definitely use. Just be careful because it will tend to make it easier for your fabric to warp. So if you're using steam, definitely only press and don't twist. I used to use steam a lot until I learned to hold the iron down longer. And then I don't feel the need to so much. But sometimes, especially when you're joining rows together, and you just need a bit of extra help to get it to sit flat. So now what do you do if you've done that exercise and you find that this gap here is less than 2 inches? So if this gap across here is less than 2 inches, it means one of two things. One is that you may have ironed in a pleat into one of your seams. So, it might be just pushed over slightly. And then when you press and it's all crisp and nice, but then if you put your finger down there, you'll find a little pleat. So that's the first thing to check for. And then if that's not the case, it's because your seams will be slightly too big. So if your piece is too small, your seams are too big. And it only takes a tiny wee little bit to make a difference. So you can often get away with it on just one piece like this. But if you were doing something like a border where it's strip after strip after strip, that difference is going to really add up very, very quickly. And so you want to try to make sure that those are working okay. Now, if this is too wide and more than 2 inches, what that means is that your seam is a little bit too small. And so that's an easy fix because you just go in there and sew just slightly to the right of actually you're going to put it in your sewing machine, aren't you? With your guide there. So you're going to sew just very slightly to the left of your stitches that are already there. And then you should find that will pull that in a bit and get the right size. So what else do I need to tell you about? So people often ask me, do I need to do a scant 1/4 of an inch on this pattern? And the thing is that it doesn't vary by pattern, because every quilt designer works to the maths, which is these are each going to be 2 inches finished. And then my piece, before I sew it into anything, I have to add 1/2 inch for the outside seams. So it means that this should measure 4.5 inches from here to here. And so these should be 1/4 inch seams. However, we're dealing with fabric, not metal. And so because we've got fabric, there's a little bit of a bump here as where we fold. So usually that takes up 1 or 2 threads of fabric. So it could be that you've got a particularly thick thread, or it could be that your fabric's quite thick, or it could be your pressing, but you will lose a little bit of your seam in this fold here. And so what they say is, if you sew what they call a scant 1/4 of an inch, which is very slightly under, it's like the width of a thread underneath, less than a 1/4 of an inch measured, then when you fold it back, you're going to get your full 1/4 of an inch seam. So I hope that makes sense to people. So I don't know if you can see on there. Can you see on there? You see the stitches on there?
Yep.
Okay. So you can vaguely see a little fold line just like next to my stitching on the left. And so that's effectively where the seam is coming because of folding it and pressing it. But so that's why if people come to me and go, but I've measured my seams and they're 1/4 of an inch, so why is it not working? And so it's not the seams that you need to measure, it's the results that you measure. So there you go. And then the final point I'm going to make is about doing your borders. So I'm going to come over here and switch cameras again. Hello again. So one of the questions we get asked a lot is about sewing on borders, because if all you do is like cut a long strip and sew it onto your quilt, you're going to find that your border can be really wavy. So there's something that you need to do, and I'm going to see if you can see if I stand up here. Right. I'm going to turn this light off because it's a bit too bright. There we go. That's better. So when we've finished our quilt top, what you want to do is to put on your top and bottom borders. You're going to measure from the outside of your quilt top to this side, and you do that through the center of the quilt. So you want one measurement, and then you're going to make your border strips and cut them exactly to that measurement through the center. And then when you sew them on the top and the bottom, your borders are both the same length. And so you're pulling your quilt into a frame to make it square. Now, it doesn't matter if the top and bottom of your quilt are actually a little bit longer or shorter, because what you're going to do is ease it to fit. So when you put your border on, you want to be lining up the edge of the border with the edge of your quilt and putting in a pin there. And then you do the same at the other end. The edge of your end of your border, pin it to the end of your quilt. And then you can fold both of them in half and find the center and match up the centers and pin those. Then you can fold in half again, match them up and pin them, and so on. So that's the way to make it so that your borders fit and everything's nice and square and straight. And then when you've done your top and bottom borders, you then measure from the top of the quilt to the bottom of the quilt through the center and make your side borders exactly the same as each other as that measurement, and do the same pinning exercise. So why do we need to worry about that? Well, if you've ever quilted a quilt, then you'll know If your borders are wavy, it makes it really hard to make them sit nice and flat without pleating. Also, if you've taken your quilt to a long arm quilter, then she might have mentioned something to me or somebody in the past about making your borders right. So that just makes life a whole lot easier, and also makes the trimming up afterwards a lot easier as well. So there we go. Let me see. Do we have any other questions? Okay, so the quilt behind me is my patchwork and quilting techniques class that I've taught in the shop, and now I teach it online. And I'm going to be starting up a session of this course, which takes you right from picking the fabrics through to piecing, the applique. We've got some applique blocks on there. We're making Dresden plates. We're making flying geese, square in square, New York Beauty. So we're doing foundation paper piecing. So it's a real pile of techniques that you're going to learn. And once you've done the quilt top, we also do all the quilting. So we do how to layer it together, how to pin it and baste it, how to, before we do that, of course, we do the sashings and the borders. And then we do how to quilt it and how to quilt each of the blocks. And we do both free motion quilting and hand quilting accents. And we do some machine quilting by marking on patterns and making nice patterns on there. So that class is going to start in 2 weeks' time, and it's pre-recorded videos, which you can watch whenever you want, and you'll keep them after the class. And also we're going to have a weekly Zoom meeting, which means you actually get to come on screen and show things if you want to. You don't have to. And show any problems that you've got, and we can discuss them and solve them and so on. So if you're interested in that, you will be getting an email, which will have the sign-ups on there. And hopefully, I hope you've really enjoyed these tips and tricks. And so we will see you soon. And thank you so much for coming, everybody. And thanks for signing up. So bye. Thanks for the hands. Thank you, everybody.